My name is KG and I'm a member of the Retail Accelerator team, and welcome to our webinar this morning. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our founder and president, Rick Rommel.
Perfect, there we go. Excellent, even better. That way you've got control of the videos. So let's jump into this. A little bit for the people on the call on me. I've been in the private label business, retail business, consumer electronics business for quite a while. As Kelly mentioned, I'm the founder of the Retail Accelerator program, one of the partners in the Sprosty Network, which is a partnership that was focused on the consulting industry, largely targeting retailers, largely focusing on the challenges they all have with growth. I also work with Stanford as one of those distinguished visiting scholars. And I think most importantly for everybody on this call, I've been around the retail space and in the startup space for a long time. And specifically, I served for 12 years at Best Buy, both as a merchant running a big chunk of their computing business, as well as the first general manager for what became their exclusive brands private label business, which grew, I think they've now said publicly, from about zero to about $2 to $3 billion on my watch. I also had a good stint for about 4 years leading the Best Buy Enterprises focus on new and emerging business. And as such, we spent a lot of time looking at new categories, looking at where industries are going, thinking through what would continue to make Best Buy relevant in a rapidly emerging consumer product space. So we looked at things, everything ranging from electric vehicles to what's now become the smart home tidal wave, energy management, healthcare, aging in place, wearables, etc. Before that, I won't bore you with the background, but I spent a fair amount of time at a multinational at Kodak way back when they were trying to make the pivot from film and paper to digital. That back around the late 90s, early 2000s, and before that I had a stint at a startup company, so I've been in, for those of you that are in startup companies, I've been in your shoes, and I started my career oddly launching satellites at Hughes in Los Angeles, so as many of my colleagues like to say, I really am a rocket scientist, I guess. So a little bit about me, provides a little bit of context of why of essentially a broad view on both how retail operates and how product companies, either large OEMs or startup companies, interact with, work with, and build profitable relationships with those retailers. Next slide, please. So what we're going to cover today, what problems are we trying to solve in the business called the Retail Accelerator? We'll cover off on that. We'll talk about why retail distribution is critical. We'll talk about the startup class program, the Retail Accelerator construct itself and participation, and obviously we'll close with what do you do if you are interested. So next slide. So first off, the problems we address. So let's talk here about why we're here. And there's two sides of this coin. One is the retailer side, the second is the startup side. On the retailer side, retailers are always looking for competitive advantage, looking to bring new products, exciting new products to their customer base. They tend to work largely with the large companies, as you'd expect. I mean, what if it's in tech? It's it might be an Apple or a Samsung or it's P&G. It's a range of large companies. At the same time, they're always trying to find something new and innovative, and many of those products come from startups. That said, working with startups for a large retailer is really hard to do. And one of the things that we found in trying to bring innovative new companies to retail was that there wasn't a lot of, actually there's almost no infrastructure to help an early stage company beyond the point where you've got two founders that have a great idea and they want to go into an accelerator that ranges from Techstars to 500 startups to the incubators around the world. And I think I remember a count to the effect that there's something like 1,400, 1,700 of those kind of really early stage founder support constructs around the world. There's a lot of that, but there's not much at the latter stage of their development when those startups hit that also crucial point where they need to go to market and they need to scale up, which gets right into the startup challenges, right? One of the things we're going to talk about this morning is what role does distribution play in startups, and I think we're going to dispel some myths here. And then we're going to talk about the various plays that you as an early stage company can employ to approach retail. And it's not as simple as, can I get a product on a shelf or, frankly, in the online virtual shelf. We'll also talk a bit about being retail ready, which is a consistent problem according to retail. We'll dive some more into that in a bit. And then we'll de-risk a bit the notion of what does ramp up through retail look like, what's good look like, what's safe, what's not safe. We'll talk about that. And finally, on partner companies, you know, it's interesting. We talked a lot to the OEMs, ODMs, and think, you know, the HPs, the Samsungs, a lot of the big multinationals. Startup discovery for them is also very high, and one of the things that makes that even a higher risk issue is it's unclear to those big suppliers, those big vendors, those big brands, what is going to be of interest to retail right now. So this notion of, you know, having an intersecting view of what retail cares about and what big OEMs might be looking for in a startup to provide them as a capability is one of the things we also try to address. Next slide. Next slide. Thank you. So on this chart, let me start with the bottom part of this, right? When we talk about retail buyers are seeking needles in a haystack, every mass retailer has somewhere between, I don't know, 20,000, 500,000 SKUs. They have a lot of products. They have a lot of suppliers. There's a revolving door of new products, discontinued products, new vendors coming and going. So it's a very chaotic, choppy, rapidly evolving landscape, and that's what buyers at big retail are always trying to stay on top of and do a really good job of it, and it keeps them really busy. That said, to get in the door as an early stage company is really hard, and the language that many of the buyers across retail will use is that finding an early stage company that is valuable, is profitable, that will make a difference in a buyer's assortment is like finding a needle in a haystack. And given the decision every day that a buyer makes on whether or not I take, you know, another hour meeting with one of my big existing tried and true suppliers that represent a big chunk of my business, or take a sequence of meetings with an early stage company, oftentimes buyers will lean into I'll take the meeting with the tried and true supplier and see if I can build more business with them, rather than take that sequence of meetings with early stage companies that may not yield any value. So that's one of the challenges they're trying to find. That's the first challenge that a retail buyer faces. The second challenge is what we call retail readiness. Even when a buyer finds that company and puts their finger on it and says, wow, I want to work with that company. The next question is that early stage company ready to engage with a mass retailer? And in many cases, the answer to that's no. So when we talk to many of our retail partners, from Walmart to Amazon to Target to Best Buy to Lowe's to Staples, all those guys, everybody, oftentimes what they'll say is, my first problem is what I first said, which is finding needles in the haystack. And my second problem is, once I find them, get those companies as ready as you possibly can to actually meet us as a retailer with what they need to succeed. So help them be ready for that moment and for that onboarding process, so that company can be relevant to me, a buyer, and the company itself can be successful working with us, the retailer. Next slide. So with that, how do we think about retail connections? And one of the anchors of what we do here is not just put companies through a class structure that I'll describe in a little bit, but we actually connect each of the emerging companies, each of the startup companies that run through our program, to retailers at the end of the program, and most importantly beyond. So we close the program that we put together with a portfolio day, and I'll cover more on that in a bit. And this is, here you've got Amazon, Walmart, Sears. I mean, these are 3 of the 4 big U.S. anchor mass merchants that are actually present physically on our portfolio day. Next slide. And once we finish with the portfolio day, we continue to work with the companies that come through our accelerator with all the major retailers in the U.S. And the ones we work with are as different as the companies that we talk to. I mean, it ranges from, you know, the sporting goods industry to hard goods, you know, the Lowe's, the Home Depots, to staples and office supplies, to obviously the mass merchants, some electronic, pretty much across the landscape. So in many ways we provide, in fact in all ways, we provide as much as we can a turnkey go-to-market support system and ongoing support business model for the startups that enter our program. Next slide. Why is retail distribution critical to scale? It sounds like a trick question. Next slide. And I'm going to explain why it's not. I've spent a lot of time with companies, kind of emerging companies, startup companies around the world. And oftentimes there's a bit of a myth of why can't I continue to sell online? And that is probably my primary go-to-market model, whether it be directly through your own website, whether it be indirectly through you know, Amazon or similar online merchants. Why isn't that my driving go-to-market aspiration? And I want to say a couple things. Right. First is Reid Hoffman has a great quote, and he says it's basically to the effect of, and we put this on our website, in any category, it's not the first company to market that wins. It's the first company to scale. And that's a really, really, really important statement, right? So said more plainly and differently, if you get to market first, but someone that follows you 6 months, a year, 2 years later ends up scaling better, building a stronger business, you're going to lose that category as the market leader. You'll lose your chance to lead. And how might that happen? Well, what might happen is you go to market, you start to sell, but you don't actually crack the bulk of the distribution network, which really runs through retail. And that's what this slide's all about. And what it really says, and I think this is government data, U.S. Census Bureau data, and you look across all U.S. retail sales, and you ask yourself what percentage of those sales are going through physical retail, which are going through the online arm of physical retail, in other words, Walmart.com, BestBuy.com, Lowe's.com, et cetera, and then what percent goes through sort of the pure play online players, Newegg, Amazon, et cetera. And what you find is, you know, almost 93% of all sales is still going through physical retail. Once you add in their online equivalents, you're almost at about 97%. So about 3%, and this is, you know, what was it, 2016 data, so back to 2015, only about 3% of all U.S. product sales are going through online-only retailers. So say it really bluntly, regardless of the state of physical retailer, one retailer versus another, the fact of the matter is the bulk of consumer products are still sold through physical retail and their online equivalent. That said, what you see on the charts is that the percentage of sales that's going through online sales continues to increase. We'll talk more about that. So that's absolutely a trend, but you can't confuse the shift to online sales with the fact that so much of the sales for all products come through physical retail. And obviously those numbers differ quite a bit by category. Consumer electronics is very different than food, for example. But this is the total. Next slide. Just breaking up what the online sales growth looks like. And you can see that, you know, roughly about every year it's probably growing 1%-ish, more or less. So you can see that, you know, over the next, presuming this trend line holds over the next few years, make it next 5 years, another 5% of sales will be done online. And again, remember, this online is that mix of pure play online retailers as well as the online component of many of the brick and mortar retailers. Next. I mentioned that breakdown differs a bit by category. Now, we're not going to drain the pond on all the various different types of categories, but we thought we'd bookmark this with the average there in the upper left, which is overall retail sales, and that's still the 97-3 split. If you look at consumer electronics, which is one of the categories that's most rapidly moved online. The numbers look different. So as you can see there, it's more 90-10. So it's not 97-3, it's more like 90-10. And the total number of things that are sold online, as you see there, is the 10% plus the 13, so I'll call it 23%. So an awful lot of consumer electronics are sold online. That's one of the leading categories that shifted to online sales, at least in terms of physical products. And we'll talk about e-publishing and music and what have you. I think it gives you kind of a good sense of what that rush looks like. And from a physical sales point of view, don't ever forget that online sales in some ways do so really well when you have really small products of really high value that are relatively low cost to ship, so with decent margins. So a chunk of what the shift to online looks like is driven in part by product attributes. Next chart. Showrooming. Everybody on this call has heard it. And by the way, it's a call to action. I think if you've got questions, please throw them into the chat log. Kelly, our moderator here, will be happy to pick those up, ask me those questions as they show up. So as you've got questions, I'd go through this. Please chime in. Happy to stop and pause and take your questions as we go. So that said, on showrooming, this is another way of talking about the same issue, which is the relevancy of physical retail. So if you look at the chart on the left, and this happened to be a CE product since it's so notable in the industry. There's so much buzz around it being sold online. Note how many people plan to buy some consumer electronics at a physical mass merchant. I mean, you see in the Walmart Target on the far left. You see, 48% of people have purchased something from those mass retailers in the last 12 months, and 60% of people intend to do so in the next 12. Rinse and repeat that language for Best Buy, H.H. Gregg, and you get 41 of 55. Then you look at online, you see a lot of people intending to buy online as well. All that way of saying is individual consumers and demographics are sorting through their channel mix. In other words, where do I want to buy a product? And if there's a belief that there's been a death knell around physical retail, that's not what the consumers are telling us, at least in surveys, as evidenced by this graph, nor is it what's showing up in terms of the sales volumes. As we've talked about that, 97-3 split overall and kind of the 90-10 split for consumer electronics. The chart on the right, and you see the simple march in the growth of the consumer tech industry. So it continues to grow even as the shift of sales from physical retail to online continues at that 1% plus or minus pace over time. Next chart. I'm not going to drain this one in details, but we wanted to highlight, for those of you who don't have a sense of scale, just treat this as a convenience item that we've done it so you don't have to do your homework. And it's a chart of U.S. retailers. And you start with obviously Walmart at the top at about $343 billion, Kroger at 103, Costco at 79, call it 80, Home Depot at 74-ish, and this is NRF data from 2016. You see Amazon at 49, 50-ish, Best Buy at 35, 36-ish. So you see the relative size of these retailers. And it's another way of just punctuating the fact that, so much of products are sold through retail. One of the things I want to hammer home here, that if you want to succeed in your category and you want to grow and you want to be a winner in that category vis-a-vis the inevitable competition, whether you start with competition or they simply fast follow you, you've got to be able to scale up through retail. And these are the kind of numbers that they sell through, which is the evidence that this is the way you get to consumers. So hopefully I've beat you need to be working with retail horse to death. Next chart. Kelly, please just flesh out the chart, please. Thank you. So cracking the code at retail. We've said a bit about why, In other words, that's the distribution channel you need to get to scale. We've talked about the relative percentages. We've talked about the challenges that buyers have in terms of reaching out to early stage companies. So what does it take to crack the code? Well, the first bullet's probably an obvious, right? Do your homework, establish your niche. Be really, really clear on what you're delivering and why. What may be not so clear is be clear about what your niche looks like to an individual retailer. So in other words, every retailer has a very different demographic customer segment. They have different aspirations, different goals. Understand how your category, how your product category fits into what they're trying to deliver to their customers. So that, and trust me, as you get under the covers with retailers, you find that there's no one size fits all. They're all wildly different one from another. The common denominator, they end up providing a product to a consumer, but how they market it, how they sell it, how they price it, how they merchandise it, how they buy it, all those things can be very different. Second bullet, prepare your go-to-market strategy and stick to it. A go-to-market strategy, we're going to talk more about this. A go-to-market strategy is much more than let me get to a really big retailer, or get to a couple of them, and I think that'll be sufficient. There's a lot more to it than that. Goes into that, and putting together that program is part of what actually a buyer is looking for in a company they might work with. And the absence of that tells a buyer that that company may not be ready to work with them. So having that strategy in place and being able to vocalize it and present it is really important. And to that end, make sure you build the team of experts to support your objectives and what you're trying to do. And those in an early stage company, many times you can't afford to buy all the experts, so renting them, partnering with them, getting them to help fill your capability gaps is something that you absolutely need to do, particularly in the first few years of your growth. Next slide. Kelly, I don't know that you were going to play a video for this. If not, we can go right past it. It's up to you.
Hi, it's KG. We're actually going to skip playing the videos during the webinar. What I will do is put into the chat feature the links to the videos. So we'll keep moving forward.
Perfect. So it's my point about, putting a go-to-market plan. And I won't belabor what Omnichannel is. Hopefully everybody in the call has heard this. The term's been around for quite a number of years. It's the mix of channel methodologies might use to go to market, most typically referred to as being store plus online. But in reality, it's much more complicated than that, which is what I'm starting to enumerate with the bullets below. So going to retail means utilizing brick and mortar options. So that's pretty obvious. I'm going to get a product on a shelf. What's less obvious to people who have not been in retail is every retailer has a different strategy, complement, capability to bring your product into their stores. So it's not as simple as Walmart saying, for example, wow, I love your product, so you're only playing your playbook because I'm going to put you in 3,000 or 4,000 stores. That can be wildly dangerous for a product that hasn't been tested yet. It's certainly not tested at scale. So many retailers have really interesting mixes of lab stores, pilot stores, that give you as an early stage company an opportunity to test your product in a limited footprint before you decide to go broad. And that's really important. So in other words, you might get a 5-store, I'll pick on Walmart for a while since they're in our program. You might get a 5-store deployment with Walmart in some of their test stores so that you can kind of ring out your marketing messaging, test your products, make sure you don't have return problems, kind of get your feet underneath you before you start to scale it further, before you go to 300, let alone 3,000 stores. The second thing, of course, is online options, and that takes the form of obviously direct sales. Retailer buys from you, puts in their distribution center, sells broadly, or marketplaces where effectively you show up as an indirect retailer or a small storefront and you're providing fulfillment. So it's kind of a range of online options even in that space. A third option, which is near and dear to my heart, is private label. As I mentioned in my introduction, I spent 6 years growing Best Buy's private label business, and those are the brands Insignia, Dynex, Rocketfish, et cetera. It turns out that is a really interesting alternative, not even an alternative, an add to an early stage company's go-to-market model. It's not maybe as widely recognized that many of the major companies, at the same time that they're selling their own brands, are also white labeling products for private labels at mass retailers. There's no reason that same play can't be used by early stage company in kind of a two-pronged go-to-market model where you've got your own brand on the shelf and you might be doing private label with some differentiated features for a particular retailer. And I think it's really important to kind of think that through as being an alternative option. We've used that very successfully with companies we've worked with to help scale them up faster than they would otherwise. And by the way, the OEM white label is almost a private label difference on that play, which is, you're working with a Samsung or an HP or pick your favorite, and the product is going to market not just through their distribution channels, but also underneath their brand, if that makes sense for you. Long way of saying, there's a lot of different options for how you can take a product to market depending on what your aspirations are and what the product is and what your competitive landscape is. And then finally, on the B2B channels, many retailers have under the covers really strong business-to-business capabilities. And that's something that, it's funny, I think if I surveyed 10 startup companies, early stage companies, probably 1 in 10 can put their finger on those kind of opportunities. And that has turned out to be yet another way that many companies get to market successfully. So this is a long way of saying retail is a more complex beast, and you need to be able to leverage it for all the opportunities it can provide you as a prospective supplier and a partner.
So Rick, it's KG.
So
Rick, it's KG.
Yeah, go ahead.
You have a question that has come in from the audience. Back up to private label options. Are these more expensive go-to-market options for startups?
That's a really good question. And I guess I'd answer it like this. Typically in a private label relationship, you will make less profit than you would by doing a direct-to-consumer product under your own brand. Very common, almost always true. But at the same time, you get remarkable amounts of scale as part of that. In fact, I won't go through some of my cases, but there were cases in my work leading a private label business where we might have a private brand, and if you think about good, better, best on a shelf, we might have a private label brand in good and better, and we might have a third-party brand on best, but all of those products are made by the exact same company. Mm-hmm. And that means that company actually owns a lot of the shelf space, and for them, it's a great blended margin strategy to own a lot of that, to own the entirety of that shelf, and they get the additional benefit of getting the insight from the retail private label partners on what's happening behind the scenes with customers in those stores. So there's a lot to be said for that relationship.
We also have a second question now that has come in. Just to make sure, talking about the RX program, is the program 100% focused on getting new products into the retail stores, or is there an option there for the startups that support retailers, thinking like software as a service? And providing new tools to help improve process and customer experience. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Really good. Yeah, really good question. Really good question. And to be clear, we work with both classes of companies. We work with pure SaaS, software as a service companies that are looking at improving various parts of retail and big OEM operations. But the accelerator itself as a construct is really focused on physical products. And I'll tell you more about why when we get a little bit into the curriculum description. And I think one of the reasons why we do that is we're careful not to try to be all things to all companies. So we're being kind of laser focused on the very difficult challenge of companies that build things and getting them into retail in the most effective way possible. So that'll be more obvious when we get to the curriculum. Good question.
Great. Let's keep going.
Next chart, please. So 5 tips, and I think we've written about this, I think, online here a bit. So when you think about getting from startup to scale up, and this is almost a bit of how you think about what has to be true for you to succeed, getting in front of the buyers, getting in front of retailers, pitching yourselves as that next new partner that that company wants to work with. First is know your audience, and that may seem trite, but I've seen many times it not happen. So in other words, do your homework. Who are the buyers? What are they saying in public? What are the company's aspirations? Get to know the individual. And to the second point, know how the product fits a specific retailer. I think as I mentioned earlier, all retailers are different. It's interesting in our program, we have the retailers, each retailer gets time with the startup companies before Portfolio Day, and they describe their programs that can be beneficial to startups, whether it be test stores, whether it be onboarding programs, whether it be different commercial terms, whatever it happens to be. What you find is every retailer has a different set of capabilities to bring to you as a prospective partner, and at the same time, you need to understand how your product and solution fits into their current assortments and what they've said publicly about what they're trying to be to their customers. And I'll finish reading this. I see questions coming across. I'll finish this chart and then we'll answer some of these. Third point, bring a multi-year view to your retail pitch. That is as simple as, actually there's a retail phrase that's used often. You don't want a company that's got one and done. In other words, don't just have one product and that's all you have to sell. If you have a product, hopefully that product is the beginnings of a product roadmap so that you can become increasingly more financially relevant to that retailer as well as be more relevant to the consumers. So putting together a multi-year roadmap gives that retailer a sense that you aspire to be more important to them than what the product you might initially present to them. Fourth bullet, take low-risk first steps. Here's a simple vignette. I remember walking through, not just once, multiple times through Consumer Electronics Show in Vegas, and the number of times that I hit a company and asked them what their history was that played out something like this was many. And it would go something like this. We're on our reboot for the company. I go, why the reboot? Well, we got into retailers XYZ, and we deployed to the entire chain. We had a product problem, and the recall, the retrofit, the returns killed us, and we had to retool the company thereafter. Point one. Point two is another observation. In my days running the innovation, new business, early stage outreach within Best Buy, one of the things we would do is for early stage companies, we would take a market. It might be Los Angeles, San Francisco, it could be Atlanta, and we would initially put a physical product in those stores so the company had a chance to kind of get the bugs out of the go-to-market model, I think as I mentioned earlier. So this is all under the guise of take lower risk first steps. Sometimes you got to go slow to go fast. Sometimes you got to go slow to be certain and be safe. So one of the things we work with our companies on is to make sure we've got the right set of first steps that don't unduly put too much risk into the financial equation. And then finally, be honest about your capacity and expertise. And maybe a simple way to describe that is, at least the way I personally think about any startup company, or any company for that matter, I think about them as a puzzle. And when you're in early stage companies, if each puzzle piece is a capability, it's manufacturing skills, it's product design, it's marketing, it's financial acumen, all those things. Every early stage company is a mix of really strong puzzle pieces some places and really weak puzzle pieces elsewhere. So be really honest about what you're good at and where you need help, and get the help when you need it, where you need it. Stop. Kelly, any questions?
We have one question regarding the potential of RFID in future retail culture. Just getting a bit more into the tech side for process for retail.
Yeah, I guess I'll keep that one short because that can go in a lot of different directions. But RFIDs in terms of product tracking is really interesting, and I would file that under the broader heading of RFID as being an efficiency enabler for the entirety of the physical product supply chain. It's also, product tracking and actually component tracking is something that a lot of manufacturers are now increasingly looking to use so that, make it up, when product XYZ fails, you absolutely know what lot, what tag component might be at the bottom of that failure, and therefore be able to extrapolate where manufacturing runs have gone that might use that product and where in the world those products might be. So a long way of saying tagging is all about an efficiency play all the way from manufacturing through the supply chain all the way back to the consumer. Stop. Good question.
All right, let's keep going.
Next slide. Oh, get the program overview. Next slide. I'm going to cover this really briefly because it looks like a really busy chart. But what it's trying to tell you is it's right in the middle there. If you think about, I think as I mentioned earlier, all the really early stage incubators and accelerators, and think about Y Combinator, Techstars, and things that help really early stage company, Kickstarters, Fundable, seed VCs. There's a lot of infrastructure for the really early stage company and founders. And we got companies, help the startups at that really important point where they're just about to launch products, or they've just launched products. So they're right on that cusp of optimizing a product market fit. And now it's time to do the thing that the company was meant to do, which is to scale up and become a thriving company. So we built the Retail Accelerator to be what we characterize as being kind of the first, second stage accelerator, focused on companies at that stage. Next chart. And you can see, and this is a great chart from Susan Cohen, on kind of the differences between incubators, angels, accelerators, hybrids. And for fun, we threw in the Retail Accelerator as a second stage accelerator, as I mentioned, and described some of their differences. So for example, I'll pick on a couple of them because I'm not going to drain this chart either. So many of the incubators and accelerators require physical on-site presence. We don't. And the reason for that is at the stage at which all of you are as companies, if you're eligible and if you're a good fit for the Retail Accelerator, you're 2 years, maybe 3 years down the road. And it's not two founders anymore. You've probably got more employees. You've got offices. You've got a physical footprint. Picking up and asking you to move to participate in an accelerator makes no sense. That's an early stage, founder stage opportunity. So for us, we don't require our companies to move, so we deliver all of our content virtually, which means by definition it takes kind of the virtual webinar type of construct. And it looks very different because of that. The second thing that I guess that's different is, for us from a graduation day point of view, we're all about, look at the row second from the bottom, direct retail participation. There's other places where you can go to focus on funding. There's other places you can go to focus on initial founder expertise and advice. There's many places where you can go to get mentors. There's almost no place where you can get kind of on the fast track to retail through retail participation. So we have retailers showing up in the day, speed date with each of the companies that come to the accelerator. And then once we've got, and those companies, those retailers effectively get first crack at bringing those early stage companies to market. After that, we then take the startups to all the relevant retailers where it makes sense for them to go per their go-to-market plan. But my point to all this, it feels very different than what happens at the early stage, and that's what we focus the Retail Accelerator on. Next. To give you a sense, since I mentioned it's kind of coursework, classwork, I wanted to cover really weekly and not too much detail. What does that look like? So what you see in front of you here is at 30,000 feet, probably at 100,000 feet, what the course curriculum looks like for the accelerator itself. So you can see that we kick off week one with Retail 101, cover all the basics, all the things you think about, many things that you're probably not close to, multi-year strategies, product roadmaps, omnichannels, then get into retail sales, marketing, how you think about that, think about product development, and I mentioned long-term roadmaps as well as short-term commercialization, retail packaging. You can never forget that when you have a physical product. In many stores, the only thing that's going to sell your product, absent labor and store associates going to help pitch that product, is what's on your packaging. So you can never forget that your packaging is one of your first places where you have your communication and billboard ability to communicate to a consumer. Then we get into supply chain, kind of goes without saying, cover manufacturing, a lot of different manufacturing options, finance and accounting, how you think about cost of capital management, retail operations. How are you going to work with retail on a day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, year-to-year basis? Then there's all the what I call customer care, legal, ethics. How do you handle call centers? How do you handle returns? How do you handle sideways sales and product liquidation? I mean, all the things that happen that are, I guess I'll call them the eating your broccoli of retail. It's not the sexy launch of a brand new product, but it's the things you have to be really good at it to manage a business on an ongoing basis. We can, I think, as I mentioned, we've got a retail roadshow. We have the retailers present back to the early stage companies, so they get a sense of what the under-the-cover capabilities are of each retailer, which then prepares us for portfolio day, and we spend a fair amount of time with each one of the companies as an overall RX business, and also through the assignment of coaches. Every company that comes through this process has a Retail Accelerator assigned coach to help them navigate through the process, particularly given it's virtual, and actually find the best resources we can given the specific needs and the capability gaps for each company. Next chart. One of the other things we do is for the technology-related companies, there's automatic enrollment in the Consumer Technology Association, which is a fabulous thing, actually, if you've not worked with them closely. It's one of those organizational asset gems that people just don't come to understand. So we sign you up automatically. You get access to their market research. They got a ton of it, and their teams. They actually have a very extensive mentor program. So you can sign up to get, you can get like 60, 70, 80 different mentors that you can get access to through the program. You get access to webinars, workshops, you get event registration discounts, networking opportunities. One of my favorite benefits is if you go to the Consumer Electronics Show, they have lounges where in a wickedly crowded Consumer Electronics Show, you can rest and hold meetings for free. It's invaluable. So we encourage all of our companies not just to utilize their auto enrollment, but to kind of explore the options and take the membership, use the membership to its fullest. Next. So a few quick stats. We've finished our first accelerator class. Along the top there are some stats, and you see that we had 717 applications. We're being very public about the size of the funnel. We ended up bringing 7 companies through the accelerator. We had 22 capability partners, most of which I think are shown up on this page by way of logos, presenting through the course. Think about these as guest lecturers in these virtual webinar formats. And it ranges from Argus Insights with market insights from ratings and reviews to D2 that does a great job of working through out-of-box customer experience work to Dragon Innovation in manufacturing, to Stephen Gold in supply chain, Ingrid Micro in supply chain, et cetera. So that we had quite a community of companies that were teaching and presenting content and obviously standing by to provide capabilities as a partner for these startups if you think you needed that particular capability. So said really bluntly, when I said earlier that every startup company is like a puzzle, and each startup company, some puzzle pieces are stronger than others. For puzzle pieces where you might not be that strong, these are partners that you can bring in to kind of fill in those gaps. So again, all under the guise of we want to make sure that when you start to go to market, you as a startup company are as capable as possible, both individually and as a company with a set of partners that collectively provide retailers the competence and the expertise they need to see to bring you to market. Next chart. companies in our first class, love all these guys. Trago, EasyCube, Lifestyle Lock, Theo, Mobidexter, also included, I think there was a question earlier about SaaS companies. We actually also brought in our first portfolio day a couple software as a service companies in to talk to our retail partners. And they did not come through the accelerator per se, but we're, as the accelerator, we're working with these companies on an ongoing basis. And those two were Sim Machines, one's a machine learning program, and the second being Percolata, and that's a smart software system for the optimal scheduling of retail labor. And both have really quantified benefits for the retail partners that we brought them to. I will say, and there's probably nowhere else to say it really well, is every one of these companies walked away from our portfolio day, I think, with opportunities with every single one of the channel partners that were attending the event. I think the startup companies were kind of shocked that they had that much opportunity with each of the retailers, and frankly, it's more than one opportunity per retailer. And I think the retailers had that same view. So I mean, it's a really interesting. We're really excited about the kind of the map of startup companies to retailers and the sheer number of opportunities we found for each company. Next chart. So class participation, how do you think about it? A couple ways to think about this. First is simply the financial terms. And that's as simple as we've got a program entry fee of about $15,000. We take about half of that up front and half of it before portfolio day. We take another $100,000 or 2% of equity and warrants in the company, whichever is less. I mean, obviously for large companies, the $100,000 is a better bet. For a smaller company, the 2% warrants makes more sense. And then we have an ongoing rep channel management relationship with the companies that come to the program. So in other words, we don't get you through the 12-week program that kick you out of the nest and hope you succeed. We've got an ongoing business relationship where we win when you win. So to be really blunt about this on these equity and cash terms, what it comes down to is, other than a little bit of cash up front that helps defray some of the costs of running the program itself, almost all of our compensation in the form of either the options and warrants and the 5% of sales, which is kind of a very standard rep company channel management fee structure, those only pay off for us if we can make you successful. So we are wickedly, critically incented to get companies into the program that we think we can make successful, because if you're not, then we're not, and that's a bad thing. So we're just to be really clear on what side of the table we line up with. We're going to win when you win. And to that end, we'll continue to provide the channel management opportunities downstream. And we also would like to be called when you eventually start to become more successful and you start raising money. We'd like the option to potentially invest in those rounds as that makes sense, which frankly no CEO would ever turn down the invitation or the offer to potentially show up as both a partner and investor. So it's kind of fun. Next chart. So how to get the most out of the experience? It's a virtual course, so there's a lot to be said about actively working in it. In fact, all the programs and 100% of our companies through our first class, not only do they participate in the classes live, but because they're recorded, they would go back and replay the sections of the classes that make the most sense for them. So having that in the can and having the ability to kind of replay that, it reminds me of the Khan Academy finding where people often learn better when you can replay coursework kind of when you want it and replay the parts of the course that make the most sense for you. You'll be designated a coach. You can be working with that coach on and off. You can be working with capability partners. Think about the 22 companies in the prior chart that I just showed. We're going to help work with you to be retail ready to make that presentation pitch on portfolio day. So make the most of that moment. And again, based on the way that we succeed when you succeed, we are 100% incented to make sure you are as successful in that portfolio day as possible. Finally, in terms of collaboration across a cohort, we're finding more and more of that. That was an interesting finding from our first class. I mean, the great news is because this is a virtual program, you don't have to pick up and move your company. And in fact, the other benefit is we had companies in our first class from Hong Kong to Estonia. So the range of the physical breadth of where we can pull companies is frankly unconstrained. But one of our surprises was a lot of the companies were really interested in collaborating with each other, and that became even more clear when we had our physical portfolio day with retailers here in Minneapolis, which is where our headquarters is. Next chart. So with that, I think we're going to close with, at least I'm going to close with a thank you. Love to have you all on the call. I think we'll throw it open for questions, and we'll go from there.
Excellent.
Kelly?
Yep, it's KG here. We've got a question that has come in about access to the virtual courses. Is there a way for other startups to access only the virtual courses? I read that to mean that they're asking, does the retail pitch day have to be a part of it?
That's a great question. At the moment, we are not making the coursework publicly available. We are considering doing that. And to be clear, the virtual coursework, we're thinking about potentially having an expedited online course that doesn't culminate in a portfolio day and a retail go-to-market relationship. Stay tuned. We don't have that yet. Right now, the only way to get into it would be through the Retail Accelerator program itself. Yes, and it could be a paid course. Exactly right. Well, good question. So, since Raphael, you're very active on the chat log, how much would you be willing to pay for a retail course like that? You can send that note directly to KG, our moderator, if you chose.
How do you select the partner retailers for the class?
That's a good question, and I think I'm going to answer that in an interesting way. The way that our portfolio day is constructed, I mean, it's a it's a 2-day event. We have a prep day where there's a dinner with all the retailers and all startup companies. We then get into the portfolio pitches and the breakout sessions. You can't. There's a limit to the number of retailers you can have in that kind of a cadence, and so we have really focused on the larger mass retailers and a couple others that have a really unique kind of go-to-market model. For example, we had Constellation Energy, one of the 3 biggest utilities in the U.S. that were remarkably interested in some of the companies that came through the first class. So I think that we are looking for really broad, not as narrow distribution partners to be in the portfolio day live. That said, the second part of that answer of 2 is that if your go-to-market model requires you to go to mass retailers like Amazon and Walmart and Sears, and then also you've got specialty retail, and it could be sporting goods, it could be hard goods, it could be consumer electronics, we then work with you to thereafter take you to those retailers as your go-to-market plan that we develop collaboratively with you. Makes sense?
Rick, you just muted for a second. There we go. We do have another question that has come in. What is the timeline for our next RX class? What's the submission process, acceptance, what the dates are?
Perfect. KG, do you want to talk about the acceptance process?
Sure. So we are currently in a recruitment period, and what we do is if you go to RetailXelerator.com, you'll see an apply button. And there is a questionnaire that you're asked to fill out, and that goes into our vetting process. As Rick mentioned, our first class, we did have 717 applications that came through. Our team then goes through the process, working with our partners at startups.co to critically vet the companies that come through. And from there, interviews take place, invitations to join the class are extended. And then we start with the webinar portion, the virtual portion of the class. Anything you want to add, Rick?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's right. And I think from a timing point of view, I mean, typically it takes us a couple, 3 months to get through the company sourcing, the vetting, the onboarding. So we're expecting to start the class, this fall. Will be the next class. So it's if you're interested, absolutely apply. If we think you're a great fit, then that'll turn into there's an ongoing cadence for interviews, vetting, et cetera, before you actually get into the class. One other point, I see a number of hands raised. If you've got a question or a comment, please type it in with chat, and we'll answer questions actually posed in a written form through chat. Other questions?
Yep, another question that has come in, which is when will be the next class after RX2? This particular question says we won't have our minimum viable product for a few months.
Oh, great question. It'll probably be spring of next year. So think about, you're probably in the April, May-ish kind of a timeline. Right now our cadence looks like about 3-ish programs per year, at least as we see it at the moment. But I do want to caution, I want you to take my comments as our view right now. As I said earlier at the beginning of this presentation, there really isn't another stage 2 accelerator that we're aware of. Trust me, we've beaten the bushes worldwide, not just in the US, but worldwide. And as such, we're creating this model almost from scratch. So how fast we run this model and how many companies we move through it will be somewhat dependent upon demand. And if the first class demands any indication, there's a lot of demand out there. We're trying to figure out how to handle it. It's a good problem to have.
Definitely. That last call here for questions.
Going once?
Yes. Here's one. Are there custom solutions for companies?
I guess I'm not, I hear the question. I'm not sure I know what that means.
I was thinking it's asking if you tailor something for specific retailers.
Yeah, I could have read that a little bit differently. Can you elaborate a little more clearly?
Mr. Lopez, if you could expand on your question a little bit, please. For founders and their startups, do you do custom? Understood.
So let me answer that 2 ways, right? One is, right now we're talking about the Retail Accelerator program as we've described it. I think what's likely to happen, and I won't belabor this, but the Accelerator program is likely to take different forms over time. So I think watch for our announcements over the next 60 to 90 days for other things that might be of interest to you as a startup company, depending on what you do, what categories you're in, and which retailers you're trying to get to. That's point 1. Point 2 is we do work with companies outside of the Accelerator program. So in other words, I think I mentioned the software as a service is one of those cases where we are working as the go-to-market support organization for software as a service companies, but we are not running them through an accelerator. It's just the complexion of those companies is very different and doesn't fit that accelerator model and how it can provide benefit. So I think we do tailor what we are for the companies that show up, but that's probably something better handled offline.
All right, Rick, we're at the top of the hour.
I think we're good then. You've got to love being like exactly on time contract.
Absolutely. So everyone, thank you very much for joining our webinar today. We are recording this session and we will be planning to post this on RetailXelerator.com. And as mentioned during the webinar, if you're interested in joining an RX class, please visit RetailXelerator.com and click on the apply button. Thanks very much for joining us, everyone.
Thanks all.